Few forms of cultural expression have spanned human history with the depth and breadth that tattooing has. It appears in communities at every corner of the globe, from ancient Egypt, where women had specific tattooing practices to complement their birthing rituals, to the Maori of New Zealand, whose prolific tattoo culture has survived to this day. Claude Lévi-Strauss said that the purpose of tattooing among the Maori people, which was a decorative cultural characteristic, was to stamp onto the mind all the traditions and philosophy of the group. Yet along with this rich history there is a dark undercurrent of involuntary demarcation that has also survived. This tattooing is designed for oppressors to exert dominance and control over their subjects. Marking the body with a permanent sign in a compulsory situation is a clear means of exercising what he, Foucault, calls a microphysics of power over that individual. That person is thus clearly subjected to the authority that imposed the mark, and the domination and institutional framework and hierarchy of relations clearly expressed in it. Historically, compulsory tattooing has been associated with countries and cultures too numerous to describe in one presentation, so for the contextual purposes of this video, I will be briefly touching on the use of tattooing on slaves in ancient Rome. In the second mime of Herodotus, 3rd century BC, a slave is tattooed on the forehead, and with the proverbial words, "Know yourself." In this context, however, they seem to have a more particular meaning of know your place, or know your status. This project began as a search into the ways tattooing has been and is currently used in the dark world of human trafficking, particularly sex trafficking. Today, sex trafficking impacts almost 4.5 million adults and children in the world, with 98% of the victims being women and girls. So far this year in the United States, 2,678 sex trafficking incidents were reported to the National Human Trafficking Resource Center's hotline, although it is difficult to find conclusive statistics that estimate the number of people currently in sexually exploitative bondage. Women who are kidnapped and forced into sexual servitude experience abuse in many forms, not limited to the physical, but the emotional as well. These instances represent a time when tattooing is used to inflict mental duress long after the initial pain of the act has subsided. But it is also used to delineate ownership, signifying which pimps these women, quote, belong to. This is concurrent with historical records on penal tattooing. A second category of penal tattooing are those that inscribe the name of the emperor. Herodotus informs us that the Persians tattooed slaves and prisoners of war. He states that they marked some Thebans with the name or sign of Xerxes. This describes human degradation in the form of body modification, which is meant to humiliate and assert dominance by choosing a design that incorporates a personal insignia. To understand more about the issue, I interviewed Susan Tatuzin, an artist working in Eugene, Oregon, who founded the organization Transformation Inc. at the same time that she opened her tattoo shop, the Whitaker Tattoo Collective. Tatuzin has dedicated her skills to helping those who might view their ink as a painful reminder of their previous circumstances. She talked about a client she helped whose history of abuse was permanently inked onto her lower back. Tatuzin said, "The actual word tramp stamp comes from pimp markings, because if you were going to give them head or he was fucking you from behind, they could tell who you belonged to. That's why it was placed where it was placed. A lot of times the names were upside down, which is another slap in the face." The physical ramifications of these tattoos are perilous indeed, indicating a level of abuse and trauma that transcends the mind and forever mars the skin. Tatuzin's goal is to give these women a sense of closure and help them heal. The woman from Susan's story had been kidnapped and missing for years before she was discovered. She had no other tattoos other than the pimp marks that they gave her, Tatuzin said. You know they held her down and drilled it in. It was very colloided, so badly risen and scarred. It was the group name and then some kanji symbols and some dates, and I think it was done more than once, so they kept tagging her after certain incidents. Tatuzin went on to explain that the woman was apprehensive about getting tattooed again after having been traumatized in such an intimate way from her previous tattoo experiences. She recalls that the woman had been unable to buy a bathing suit, hated showering, and could not have intimate relationships. She'd been in counseling, Tatuzin said, and gone through all sorts of stuff, but the only last piece of the puzzle was this marking on her back. Tatuzin explained that her plan for the new tattoo was to recenter the focus. She designed a custom hip piece that branched out into a beautiful work of art, covering the tattoo on the woman's back and pulling the attention to the focal point, the new tattoo on her hip. After the cover-up was done, a transformation took place. Her mom and her sister every day sent me a message thanking me, Tatuzin said. They would send me a card in the mail every week and tell me about this progress. They called me 2 weeks after she got the tattoo, when she was bathing suit shopping. She went back to school, finished her degree, fell in love. The new tattoo allowed the woman to go through a healing process, finally covering the physical remnants of her time in the sex trafficking underworld. By covering up these tattoos with a design of their own choosing, these women can literally rebrand their identity. This is one of the reasons Tattoosin feels it is important to work closely with those who are treating women who have recently been freed from trafficking. We talked to specialists and counselors, Tattoosin said. When they get to this point, this is a good step for someone to finally reclaim their body. The only thing that's left is that mark that you look at every time you take a glimpse of yourself in the mirror. One of the reasons Tattoosin works closely with professional counselors is that tattooing needs to be appropriately timed in conjunction with other rehabilitation efforts, usually after the client has already progressed in the other components of therapy. If you get them in the beginning, Tattoosin said, when they're in and out of counseling, there's still bad habits and bad decisions, and trying to help them, they end up just using it to get a free tattoo and not really healing from it. The notion that tattoos can have healing agency is not a new one. Utsi the Iceman, who is over 5,000 years old, was found intact with 61 tattoos on his body. One theory about why he had the tattoos is that they were used in ritualistic healing. They were located on parts of his body that had experienced some degradation, indicating that they were placed specifically to alleviate pain and act with tangible medicinal properties. Modern tattooing is also used in healing, although not in the same capacity that the Iceman's had been. Today, healing tattoos are used for their transformational properties and the ability to improve a person's mental acceptance of an injury. This is true in both physical cases, such as tattoos covering scars from mastectomies, as well as cases of mental illness that are physically invisible, such as the semicolon that is used to express support for mental illness and suicide prevention. While tattoos have historically been crafted by crude means, which could potentially contribute to their ability to transcend cultural boundaries, now it is relatively simple to get equipment cheaply online or even crafted out of basic household objects. This makes it fairly easy for anyone in a position of power to get the tools necessary to apply tattoos whenever and wherever they wish. But the subjection and discipline of the body is accompanied by the subjectification of the soul. The forcible imposition of the external mark, this disfigurement, serves also to make a lasting impression internally, which is difficult, though not impossible, to escape. This concept applies not just to victims of sex trafficking. People from various stigmatized groups may have tattoos reminiscent of a person they no longer identify as. Many young men involved in gang activity get tattoos that are part of initiation rituals, rank and gang classification, or a living rap sheet. These tattoos can sometimes be doled out in prisons, creating a cyclical vacuum of criminal designation, a permanent reminder of these misdeeds that can impact that person's life when it comes to getting parole, finding employment, and assimilating back into society. This stems partly from the history of tattooing in the United States, where tattoos were seen as an art form reserved for the lowest rank of citizens, specifically after World War II. Post-war Americans rushed to marry and have families, stealing new suburban areas far away from the city neighborhoods in which tattoo shops were located. In this context, tattoos became identified primarily with rebelliousness among adolescents and young adults. Tattoos were considered lower class and deviant, associated with blue-collar workers, drunks, hot rods, motorcycle clubs, and street gangs. In the end, whether society decides to embrace an individual who is taking a second chance at life or reject them as an outcast, the significance of these cover-up tattoos belongs to the wearer. The healing process that transforms the individual restores a sense of self-determination and ownership over the body, held exclusively by these individuals. This process can effectively repair physical scarification, as well as scars formed solely in the survivor's mind. For that reason alone, aside from the obvious social capital to be won, persons who find themselves transitioning from a life spent in the trafficking business benefit from exploring the physical act of choosing a design that they identify with to cover the offending area. Tattooing as a rite of passage, signifying the stages emphatically. The pain associated with getting tattooed adds to these rites, effectively giving the wearer a bodily sensation to match their inner anguish. The power of this ritual has yet to be fully realized, as social stigma still paints the art of tattooing as a deviant one. Yet, as sex trafficking remains a lucrative business, it is important to continue this work. Based on the evidence of punitive tattoos from thousands of years ago, I believe that as long as the trade of human trafficking continues, the practice of subjugating persons being involuntarily inscribed will continue along with it. Thank you.